Hi everyone, my name is Sam Kapila. You can call me Sam. Before I begin, I want to thank Dan for that introduction. I want to thank Isaac and Nessa for all of the work that they've done to move Clarity online. And I especially want to thank Gina for all of the hard work that she's put into Clarity year after year, creating this space for us. It's been a dream to attend in the past, and it's even more of a dream to be able to speak this year. I'm humbled and I'm thankful. I hope for the rest of us that we get to meet next year in person. So, this is a talk about design and happiness, and it's also not. It's kind of a weird time to talk about design and happiness at a time like this. Not to get too personal, but maybe a little bit. I feel like I'm living inside of a glass jar, reflecting out at a world that I can't see, reflecting against the glass and thinking inward, just wanting to break out of it. It's kind of weird, and probably not how you'd expect a talk on happiness or design to start. Let's talk about design first. So, for the past year or so, I've been working on an app at ThoughtBot called Good Use. The idea behind Good Use is about putting things to, well, good use. If you're familiar with the concept of Buy Nothing Project, or the art of tidying up, or sparking joy, this may sound a little bit familiar. In case it doesn't, let's dive in and look at those two options. The Buy Nothing group, actually the Buy Nothing Project, is a hyperlocal give economy. It focuses on allowing people to use Facebook groups to list things that they want to give away so that others don't have to buy something new. They can just be gifted something. Like I mentioned, it works on Facebook groups. It's free, so it does not require Facebook Marketplace. It has community moderators, and you can only join the neighborhood in which you live. That's the part of hyperlocal, making a change in the place that you live so that it makes a larger, greater impact as a whole. By the way, the authors or the creators of the Buy Nothing Project published a book, I think in April of this year, about the Buy Nothing Project. So if you're interested, I would definitely check it out. Two key things I want to note on their site. A gift economy's real wealth is the people involved and the web of connections that form to support them. And the Buy Nothing Project is about setting the scarcity model of our cash economy aside in favor of creatively and collaboratively sharing the abundance around us. That's pretty cool. Note that they're not talking as much about the things that are given away, but about the people and about the state around us. The second part that I mentioned is sparking joy, or the life-changing magic of tidying up. You may be familiar with that concept by Marie Kondo. She's the author and genius behind this idea. And it's created kind of a phenomenon, which is kind of interesting because her book came out in 2011, but things really took off with her Netflix show, I think in 2017. The idea behind the life-changing magic of tidying up is that you only keep what sparks joy. On her website, she lists the KonMari method, which is named after her. And she says, in the KonMari method, your feelings are the standard for decision-making, specifically knowing what sparks joy. To determine this when tidying, the key is to pick up each object one at a time and ask yourself quietly, does this spark joy? Pay attention to how your body responds. A lot of people confuse this with minimalism, and Kondo was first to correct this. It's not about necessarily minimizing and getting rid of everything. It's being very selective about what you have and only keeping the things that draw good energy from you and to you. It's meant to improve your environment and inspire you to treasure what you have. These two concepts of the hyperlocal give economy and keeping things that spark joy were kind of core to the development of Good Use. But we wanted to take it a step further too. We wanted it to also spark joy on the receiving end. In the KonMari method, she talks about discarding anything that doesn't spark joy. And what we wanted to do was take the best of both of these methods or thought processes and create a community where people can give things away that they don't need and that people can wish for things that they wish they had. Putting all of these things to good use. So you may have a baseball bat and a glove that you aren't using anymore. And there might be a reason to list it. Or maybe when you peruse the app for the first time, you notice that someone else is already wishing for that for their kiddo. So you work through the exchange and you make it happen. That's a pretty cool thing. It creates happiness. You know that rather than throwing away that thing, adding to the landfill, that it's going to a better place where it's going to be appreciated by someone else. People can gift things away, recycle them, upcycle them, turn them into art. There's a lot of really good things that can come from this. And what's really cool is that organizations can use this too. A shelter can say that they're in need of towels, or paper towels, or leashes, or dog food. And you can drop things off that you may have, or pick something up extra while you're at the grocery store. It's a really cool concept. And there's also a service and volunteering side. So it's not just about material things. It's about giving what you are able to give and wishing for what you need. This is a free option as well, just like the Buy Nothing group. And it's a mobile app that we've been working on. We've been working with test groups for this, and we're kind of excited to put it out in the world. I won't share too much about the project just yet, but I do want to share a little bit about the process and what it has to do with happiness. Early on in the project, I used to say that our goal should be to inform and delight all of our users, whether they're individuals or organizations. That may sound like a familiar saying. It was said by Milton Glaser in his documentary with the same name, Inform and Delight. If you're not familiar with Milton Glaser's work, he's most notably known for the I Love New York logo that has sort of become recognizable all over the world. Milton Glaser passed away earlier this year. But that documentary is absolutely worth seeing. He took that quote, inform or delight, from a writer, a poet actually, named Horace, from the late BC's Rome. And I've changed the quote a little bit to make it a little bit more gender inclusive, but the quote states that the aim of the poet, or creative person, is to inform or delight, or to combine together in what they say, both pleasure and applicability to life. And that's really interesting. That's how we talk about UX, UI, user behavior, everything. We want to be able to inform them and delight them and keep them wanting to use or interact with the things that we create. And this was a big goal right off the bat for this project. Every decision, every prioritization, does it inform the user and does it delight them? So, like every other design project, it started with a sprint. We worked through some prototypes that are pretty strange to look at on screen in front of everybody. We started building them out in Figma. We started creating the code base for the backend server and Xcode since we started with iOS, and built out our team. We're a team of designers, brand specialists, illustrators, copywriters, project managers, developers, all working together towards making this app happen. And I even got to work with some really cool people, like a PhD candidate who's in the process of researching happiness. And we explored joyful colors and, went through Dribble and talked about geometric typefaces and maybe the joy that they bring by being open and airy. We talked about first-person voice and tone. I think that's on the bingo card. And how it should be first person and conversational and friendly and make someone want to use this app. We also created a lot of joy and happiness in our team. We thought about the way that we'd work together. We got to know each other better through icebreakers, and I worked really closely with the iOS team to learn as much Xcode as I could, not to be dangerous, but so that I could assist and take a few things off their plate that were more of the aesthetic changes to color or copy or text. And they joined me in the Figma file and learned a lot about the design process and how I named components and how that they could translate that into Xcode. It made our communication a lot more seamless. It made our handoff less of a handoff and more of a collaboration. I think it made our team really happy, and we work well together, and we're still very excited about the work that we're doing. As I think about the happiness and delight of the first part of this project, I really leaned a lot into the illustration side. I didn't want representations of people that just looked like humans. We kind of wanted a little bit more of a less exact human self and more of these shapes and bodies that were happy and joyous and a part of a community. So we came up with these blob people, as I call them, happy blobs. Tag yourself, I'm the pomegranate child getting a guitar at the bottom left of the screen. As we developed these illustrations, this is just a handful of them, the bright colors came into play, and the stories behind and the use cases of why someone might use this app came to mind. Someone might be moving and receiving things from friends and family that they could use in their new place. Someone who propagates cactus could be handing off some of those propagations to a couple that is setting up a new home. Parents could get used textbooks for their kiddo starting 6th grade. Someone could just be perusing the app as they're walking down a busy street. 2 really cool record aficionados could trade their Pink Floyd and Nirvana albums. Pomegranate Kid could learn how to play guitar. And a organization collecting presents for kids could set up shop and let people know what they need, and people can bring those things by for that toy drive. So delight was a part of this early part of the project. And that's what we thought happiness was, showing these happy blobs and that they're, living their life, doing the things that they need to do. It also came across in little ways of thinking about happiness as comfort. So a good example is showing a illustration that expresses the distance that you share one of your listings of things that you want to wish or give. And the blob is wearing heels. And I don't know about you, but I prefer not to walk 5, 10, 50 miles in heels. So even making the blobs comfortable became part of the process. I would much rather wear those shoes. Happiness is comfort, kind of an interesting concept. We focused on the giving, the wishing, and gratitude. All of these things can be associated with happiness. Giving something feels good. You feel like you're a part of something. Wishing for something that you're longing for and hoping that you get can make you happy. Giving or receiving gratitude also makes others feel good. And the last part that is sort of a secondary but really important part of this is that we feel like we're making an impact to make less waste and help our changing and heating planet. And what's interesting, with all of those illustrations and the use cases that we went through, you could plan all you want, and then a pandemic hits. And early in our testing groups, we had to think about the pandemic and the effects of it. What does handoff look like safely? What does it look like to wipe something down and leave it at your doorstep, contactless? What does it look like to meet up somewhere that maybe someone should be wearing a mask? It's a safer place than inviting someone to your home address. Thinking about all of those things and communicating that to our test group and our users. It really does change the way you look at things when life around you changes. And this is around when my definition of happiness started to change as well. It's like, what is happiness? Is it about delight? Is it about good user experience? Is it about meeting those wishes and gives, meeting people's needs? When I try to make a list of what happiness looks like, I think some of the typical words might come to mind. We think about it as this end goal. I'm going to be happy. There. Happiness has happened. And the way that I will get there includes a few of these words: delight, family, love, accolades, fame, health, pleasure, friends, career, maybe money. And the order that we prioritize these things that make us happy may be different from one person to the next. Some of the words on this list may not even make you happy, and other things are the only thing that will make you happy. Whatever the order is for you, that's fine. It's important to think about happiness in more than just these terms. I wanted to do more research to really think about why other words like comfort or safety came to mind. So I did a little bit of research and found a center that is studying the science of happiness and well-being. They're called the Greater Good Science Center, and they're a part of UC Berkeley. In their site footer, they state that the Greater Good Science Center studies the psychology, sociology, and neuroscience of well-being and teaches the skills that foster a thriving, resilient, and compassionate society. They have a bunch of great resources on their site, and one of those resources is the definition that they use for happiness and well-being. It comes to us by a scientist and author of the book, The How of Happiness. Her name is Sonia Lyubomirsky, and she has been speaking and writing about happiness for a very long time. And her definition is that happiness is the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. And when we break this definition down, there's two parts. There's an experience and a sense or feeling. And that's really interesting to look at it that way. You know, joy could be that perfect crunch of a crispy French fry as you bite into it. Contentment could be curling up on a rainy day with a perfect book and a puppy by your side. And that positive well-being, especially as a time like now, has to do with mental and physical well-being and health. And then when we think about good, meaningful, and worthwhile, it's sort of the quality that goes into those things, the end result, that it was meaningful and worth doing. These are all, again, very subjective, like the word happiness, and they mean different things for different people. But I think overall this covers a lot of ground in happiness. But the Happiness Institute, much like this talk, is also going to talk about when it's not so happy. And there are dangers to happiness, and they list 4 on their site. The first one is being too happy. Right now is a really good time to think about perhaps too happy. What they mean by too happy is that there's a false safeness that causes us to think that we're impenetrable by things that happen around the world, and that is a problem with being too happy. The second example that they list is that happiness is not suited to every situation. That always makes me think of MailChimp's voice and tone guide from back in the day, where they provide guidelines on warnings and errors, and how being chipper and happy that's not necessarily what we should be doing at the time, because a user is under stress or something has gone wrong and they need help. They don't need someone to kind of be chipper and over the top. They also mentioned that not all types of happiness are good. There can be such a thing as too much pride or too much happiness where you sort of lose sight of perspective with each other. And that pursuing happiness can make you unhappy, which you would think would be counterproductive. But what they mean is, if you're forcing yourself to get to a state of happiness, you're missing the smaller things around you that you can be grateful for, or miss seeing what's right in front of you. It's kind of interesting to think about dangers of happiness in that way. Again, going back to some of those terms like safety or pride, or this forced feeling, or other things related to this app, and just things that are in our industry, I kind of came up with a second list. And maybe these are, less things that you have, but more of the feeling side. And some of the words that I came up with are giving, receiving, gratitude, maybe enlightenment, maybe mindfulness, maybe ease, safety, trust, understanding, accessibility, inclusion, and maybe most importantly, freedom from oppression, especially with everything that's going on and things that we should be talking about. Other people's happiness is on the line. And this goes way past happy blobs and happy copy. This goes to the core of what we as people need. Need is another good word. And that brought me to something you've probably seen before, Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. It's a pyramid with 5 sections that you work your way from the bottom to the top. There are versions of this that are 8 levels high, but I prefer to use this one just for the sake of time and also making a point. If we go through this chart, there are 5 sections. At the bottom are physiological needs: food, shelter, warmth, rest, water. Above that, safety needs, so what makes us feel safe and secure. Above that, belonging and love needs, so our intimate relationships with our family and friends and people that we love. Above that, we have our esteem needs, that sense of accomplishment, feeling like we're productive. And finally, at the top is self-actualization, the achieving one's full potential part of ourselves. And these 5 sections are broken into 3 parts. The first 2, the safety and physiological, are tied to basic needs. The second part are tied to psychological needs, the love and esteem side of things. And finally, self-actualization at the top is tied to your self-fulfillment. You're supposed to work your way from the bottom to the top of this chart. And that the basic needs are most important. And that probably with a pandemic and a reckoning of an understanding that people are finally getting with Black Lives Matter is these first 2 are not being met. They're not being met for our Black community, they're not being met for our Indigenous communities, and haven't been for a very long time. And what's happening with the pandemic is we're getting focused on the I can't see my friends, or I feel like I'm not being productive. And that's why this time is so important, because we're finally realizing that the bottom 2 are not, the basic needs are not there for everyone. This is a part of happiness too, feeling like you have what you need. And it's hard. You want to take a deep breath and wonder, how am I going to make an impact? And there's a lot of information about that online. For some people that may be protest, for some people that's writing, for some people that's voting, for some people that's calling every political office or public office where they are. But I think sometimes we get a little overwhelmed that how can one person make that impact? How can one person make that change? And I go back to the Buy Nothing Project and what we're trying to do with good use. That one thing that you list that's going to make a little kid happy. That one thing that you might have been wishing for that someone gave you that changes what you're able to do. That hyper-local impact. So I think that there is a lot we can do. And in terms of what we can do in society, there's a lot of information around that. Going back to the Greater Good Science Center, they talk about well-being to really be the big umbrella part of that. Happiness isn't the front and foremost part. There's all of these other things along with happiness that lead to well-being, right? Altruism, the idea of, as they say, we act to promote someone else's welfare, even at the risk or cost to ourselves. That's, bringing up pay parity at work. Bridging differences, compassion, diversity, empathy for how and what someone else has gone through, forgiveness and gratitude for the things that we do have, forgiveness in ourselves, to be more gentle with ourselves as we deal with a pandemic and not putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, happiness, mindfulness, purpose, social connection. All of these things are a part of well-being. And there are things that we have, are tools that we have and can use to our advantage along with all the other design skills that we have to make an impact. Now, I've never done a talk without leaving people with a homework assignment. I come from a teaching background, so it's a part of who I am. So here's my call to action. Right now, we have a design industry that we can work on. It is a design system of its own that needs a lot of support and care and a lot of change. It's an industry that needs to focus on being well and everyone's well-being. What do I mean by that? I try to take every part of the design industry that I know and look at the different things that we need to work on from the day that you decide you want to become a designer to maybe close to the day you retire. Design education is steeped in white supremacy. When I think back to typography classes, I only learned about white male typographers in Europe. When I think about art movements or design movements, it was the Italian Renaissance or the international typographic style out of Switzerland that was not very international. We need to start questioning everything in our design education. If you're a student, ask for the type of work that you want to study and explore in your projects and in your reading assignments. If you're an instructor, expand past what the systems of our universities and state schools that don't let you change curriculum for over 10 years and start changing what you can. Change what's being taught. Don't just change what you think a design program is supposed to be. If you're an employer hiring out of schools, go to every portfolio review, offer your time to every student, and help them get into this industry. If you're able to recruit or hire, realize that a lot of recruiting and hiring is steeped in ableism, that you're supposed to be a certain type of designer who can work this fast and work a certain way with both of your hands, or whatever sort of thing that you're expected to come to work with. Question roles that say that you have to have 7 years of experience in Figma when it's only been around for less than 5 years. Use the positions and powers and understanding that you have right now in your roles to impact change. Think about retention. What's going to keep someone at this company? What's going to allow them to grow? As a manager, that is a part of your job. And if you are working to grow in your own role, ask more of your managers in leadership and for the support that you need, a more inclusive environment, a more sustainable environment. These are a part of happiness too, where people feel that they're a part of something and that they can go home at the end of the day and be proud of the work that they do. We need to read a lot more books, expand our vocabulary, especially in group situations and meetings, and learn about shine theory, the concept of when someone is frequently cut off in meetings or frequently has their ideas taken from them, that you shine the light back on them by saying their name and saying their idea and saying, hey, this person said this and I think it's a really good idea. Can we talk more about that? Using your power for those things. These are all very hyper-local things that we can do that give a lot more to other people. And finally, we need to really look at the clubs and organizations that exist in our industry, some that have been along for a really long time, and many that are ill-equipped and currently unwilling to make changes to their practices based on racism and white supremacy. We need to question them. We need to stop giving them our money. We need to give them competition that does the right thing. These are all things that we can do. You don't have to do everything on this list, but I hope that you start somewhere so that we can make a bigger impact to this industry, to this design system, and to the happiness of the people who hopefully next year you'll be around. Thank you for your time. Thank you again, Clarity. And if you're looking for me online, I'm Sam Kap. Thank you. Bye.
Sam, that was awesome. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Thank you for that great talk. I don't have a joke for you today. I'm just kidding. That's a joke in itself. Do you want to hear a joke about side projects?
I would love to.
I'm sorry. I'm still working on it.
Too real. Too real.
And that one cut deep.
Yeah, I felt it.
I love behind the scenes stuff. So I want to ask you a behind the scenes question first.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's some of it is apparent from your talk, but I'd love to hear it from you. Why did you pick this talk for Clarity? There's so many things that you know and are good at and have experience in. You could have talked about anything. Why write a talk about happiness for Clarity?
I think because that's a probably personally existential crisis I'm going through, that sort of redefining. So I've been on this project Good Use for a pretty long time, and through that, doing a lot of research, that first association with happiness was the giving and the wishing, the two parts of this app. and thinking like, oh, if you just fulfill someone else's wish or you give something away that's sparking joy, clearing out your house feels good. And then, COVID happened and this awakening is happening for a lot of people. And the ideas of happiness just sort of are making me question everything, maybe not throwing everything out, but sort of asking what does spark joy and what are the things that we can learn about working from home and having boundaries, and all of that sort of ties into this. So partially it was pretty personal, and part of it was also just feeling like clarity has always been a place that inclusion is talked about, and that is something that's very important to me. So it felt right for clarity.
Awesome. There's a great couple of questions in the chat that are coming in on Slido. The first one is that Christy asked two kind of sledgehammers of questions. So she asked, how do you measure happiness and joy? Which is like, oof, that's a tough one. And then to follow that up, how do you balance cultural differences when it comes to measuring happiness and joy? Any tips for us?
Wow, those are two. Let's go back to the first one. So the measuring, I think, is it's a pretty subjective thing, because happiness means something different to everyone. And that's what I was trying to capture with this is, for some people, happiness is just meeting the bare minimum. For other people, it is the self-actualization or other parts of this. So I feel like that is hard to measure in terms of when you're trying to build a mobile app that is trying to have a component of giving or wishing, fulfilling, thanking someone, having gratitude, seeing how that thing ends up in someone else's life brings happiness. So for me, a good measurement was testing out the first thing I listed, which was a puppy-shaped chia pet planner. And seeing that a grandmother in Austin reached out to me. She said it would be perfect for her 8-year-old granddaughter who loves animals and also plants, and that she would be happy to give it to her. So like measurement 1, grandma would be super happy to give this to her granddaughter. Measurement 2 was that she gave it to her granddaughter and texted me photos of her just like covering all the wet chia seeds on top of this puppy, and seeing how happy she was through photos. And, maybe it is the smile on the blob or the smile on the grandchild. And then there's that third part of like, this is bringing me so much joy because that was a planter given to me that was puppy shaped before I ever had a dog, as a, this is your dog until you get a dog, and that it could bring joy to someone else in that way. So I think seeing those sort of moments of gratitude or seeing something get that second life in someone else's life has been a way to measure it. I think you can also ask people, are you happy? I think that goes a long way if you're going more of the survey route. The second part of the question, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, sure. How do you balance cultural differences when it comes to measuring happiness and joy?
That is such a good question, and something that I'm like waiting for the moment that we get to take this to other parts of the world. But even just within the United States right now, happiness means different things. And I don't mean happiness just in the like, I'm smiling and everything is fine. Sort of to point back to the talk, there are a lot of these other needs that need to be met. So I think looking at cultural needs, and that can come again from an age perspective, from a race perspective, from a gender perspective, from a socioeconomic, financial perspective. Starting with those and just seeing what the needs are can help us figure out what happiness means in those areas, or could mean for different people.
Yeah, awesome. That's such a great answer and a cool answer, but it's also scary at the same time too, because all the stuff that you're talking about in measurement is not the quantitative, I can like poll a dashboard, a couple times a day and understand, like you're talking about a lot of qualitative stuff. Yeah. Is that by design? Is that intentional that you're talking about? Like a way to measure happiness is a qualitative metric as opposed to a quantitative one?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when we look at the app and, we pull up Mixpanel, which we're using a lot for, grabbing all the different parts of the app that people use, with the marking something as I've given this away or received this thing. Sure, that gives us the like, yes, some level of happiness happened because you asked yourself if it sparked joy, and rather than throwing it out, you thought someone else could benefit from it. So there's a little bit of that quantitative that maybe dictates a little bit, or not dictates, but informs a little bit of the path we take from a UX perspective or a feature perspective. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is qualitative, and you have to when you're building something, I'm sure as a lot of people have experienced this, and you're going through personas or user stories or case studies of how someone might use something, a critical path, you may have the ideal path in mind. Like someone will list something and then someone will immediately want it and then they'll get it and then they'll send a photo and then you'll feel good and they'll feel like that's the main one. The actually getting to the happiness part is looking at all of those other cases. The what happens when someone needs something and they can't find it, but then maybe someone else comments on their listing and says, actually, there's someone on the Facebook Buy Nothing group that I can connect you with. Or I saw one, on this neighbor's sidewalk with like, please take this stuff. Some of that other stuff that it's, when you're thinking about an app, and a lot of it needs to happen outside of the app for the app to actually work, a lot of that plays into the qualitative side and kind of leaving the door open and leaving the features open enough to allow some of that to come in so that we're not dictating what happiness is.
Wow, awesome. We have another heavy hitting question in the chat, so they're not letting up. Anne asks, how does one maintain their own happiness and the happiness of a team in an organization where the leadership perpetuates systemic issues that are toxic and non-inclusive? How do you keep your own spirits up in that environment?
I think it is important for anyone to feel like they can lead and not necessarily leadership owning that. So if you believe that your design systems team or your iOS team or your web team collectively feel a certain way, know that you as an individual or that team don't have to have a leader or manager name in your title to make change. And that's what I'm trying to say here. A student can go to a professor and say, I don't just want to learn about the same 5 typographers. I've already learned about them. Can we do a better research part? Like actually asking a lot of questions and sort of putting them on the spot a little bit more, and come up with a plan of what you would like to see and share that collectively as a group. I hope that gives Anne a few ideas of stuff that you can do, but don't wait to have that in your title.
Yeah, very cool. Let's talk about some of the collaboration bits. You kind of glossed over some of these, but you said a lot of things that kind of caught my attention. One of the things that you said was, I learned as much Xcode as I could to take as much off of their plates as I could. And I didn't expect the second part of that sentence. I expected I wanted to learn as much as I could about Xcode so that I could, become a better developer, so that I could build stuff on my own. But it was really about how you could help someone else. Like, where did you learn that approach? And do you share that? Do you teach that? Because that's pretty unusual that you wanted to learn just enough not to be dangerous, as he said, but to be helpful in that process. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how did that start and why do you do it that way?
Yeah, sure. And just really quickly, apologies to Kevin because my cat was sitting here this whole time and then just heard about Xcode and pieced out. It is something that I think comes from a little bit of the way that we work at ThoughtBot. Good Use is a client of ours, but we work with them every day throughout the day. And I talk to them more than my own teammates locally or other managers, but it was pretty important to pair as much as possible. Yesterday we heard a lot of people talk about that, actually specifically Gina talking about that divide, that handoff, and that's just not something we do. Because we are a company of designers who do play that code part, who do kind of get wrapped up in that. And Xcode was actually the area that didn't happen as much until this past year, because a lot of our team are Rails or Elixir developers. So that's a lot easier to be like, sure, show me where the CSS file is. Like, help me get this build going locally. What Ruby version do I need to be on? But Xcode requires a lot more work. And in this case, it was a lot of interest from the iOS team in design systems and design standards, because when they open their Xcode files, they have an asset catalog that needs to have all of the colors mapped out. And they always reference that color like you would with a class or variable in CSS. So they had a lot of questions for me. And because I was working in Figma kind of purposefully, so I could always just send them a link, we just pair constantly, and it's become so common. And then after a while, I started asking okay, so Xcode doesn't seem that scary. So where does this color that I named end up in that asset catalog? And that sort of led from one thing to another to like, what can they hand off to me? But even now, as our design system right now is a Google Doc. And I know that's going to horrify a lot of people, but it's because we're adding a lot of links to the Figma file and then also saying, this is the use case for a primary button or a cancel action button and things like that. And part of that is just because we're still building this thing, we're still testing this app, and using Google Docs is accessible to everyone right now. So that's what we chose to go with. And even in that, there's so much back and forth about like, if I have to frame this in the way that makes sense so that an Xcode developer can list it the way they need it. So I'm not giving them code snippets, but I'm giving them the constraints, which are basically like padding and margins and CSS, so that they can like not have to do the guesswork and figure it out. They can just like input that right away. So it's allowed us to build a lot faster and like have more empathy for each other as we work through things.
I've had a ton of people listening breathed a sigh of relief to hear that they weren't the only ones whose design system is a Google Doc. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's wrap up with one last question. This is a big one from the chat. Sean asks, happiness is a really big promise. So what should be an approach for a team that needs to own that promise and promise that to either each other or to their customers and users?
I think first is trying to break it down and define what it is for your team. And then also what it means for your customers and maybe what the overlaps might be between team happiness and customer happiness. Why I used a lot of these other terms was to sort of demystify the word a little bit, because it's the title of so many books, right? The like Stumbling Upon Happiness, The Happiness Project, some of the other ones that I listed. And there's this sort of, this is going to get super philosophical. And I'm sorry, it's also getting very dark and thunderous around me. So I'm like, sorry, I just realized it got a lot darker. Like breaking it down to some of those terms makes it a lot easier, right? Like if this was a topic in a course, you'd have modules of things that you're learning. So it's like if safety is what we want to focus on, okay, well, what does it mean to be safe as a teammate? What is it? Kat is stepping on the keyboard. Kevin, you got what you wanted. Thinking through a lot of those like details and getting into like, what does that mean to us? How do we define success? Using a lot of design processes to tackle this sort of stuff can be helpful. I'm not saying that a design sprint will solve happiness, but it's going to help you at least break it down enough for your team to figure out what next steps are.
That's awesome. Sam, thank you so much for this great talk. This was incredible and such a great follow-up to what Asia had shared this morning. Already a start to a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.